I'm dead serious about that title. Myths are 100% true, which I'm just calling Myth True for short, genuinely is a knockout title that I really think deserves your attention and respect. It kinda flew under the radar, but it really deserves more traction for being one of the most endlessly entertaining platformers I've seen in a long time. I don't want to waste your time with meaningless diatribe, but Leather Ice Cream is a creator I've been following for a long time now, and he's easily one of the most inspiring creatives I've ever seen. Just his videos alone are fucking hilarious and give you a really good peek into his mind. Seriously, check out his cartoons and his sorta riffs after this.
Can the video editor please play a music that makes everyone watching feel scared of me?
That's not how a live broadcast works.
That was funny as fuck, man!
Leather himself supplied me with a review copy that I'm eternally grateful for, but make no mistake, I would have loved this game if I never even heard of him until now. The aesthetic is very comparable to Cuphead, in the sense that it has a core visual identity based on an antiquated art form that the creators hold fondly, and additional aesthetical aspects of the game attempt to further the association with that art form. Leather's natural style is already heavily inspired by Newgrounds artists like Edmund McMillan and the late Ed Gold, but on top of that, the entire game is inspired by a seemingly random subgenre of internet culture that is so underground that I doubt many of you will even know of it. Back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was a huge fascination with urban myths in Grand Theft Auto, specifically San Andreas, and there was an ocean's worth of content made by literal children attempting to find these myths. This results in hilariously messy Windows Movie Maker videos that blast your eardrums with contemporary music of the time, while the player doodles Mothman in MS Paint and spends 80 years gunning down model-swapped NPCs. This is an utterly bizarre point of inspiration to turn into a 2D platformer, let alone a game in general, but that exotic culture is part of the appeal. It's something deeply personal to the creator to the point where if you want a crash course on this aesthetic, you can literally just watch Leather's videos on the subject.
There's a video by Darth Dementius where he did a case on the suicidal photographer myth. The dude just installed a bot that adds so much fucking grass that it lags the game. So I just bought a ton of grass here too.
That's part of the appeal of Leather Ice Cream as a creator, that he has all these weird, specific, and esoteric interests that he repeatedly goes back to. It's something deeply personal, so personal that you basically need a friend that's more brain-rotted about his work than you to parse the game's inspirations. I am that friend. I am the ultimate fucking trivia nerd when someone's streaming these games. This can only go so far, however, as worthless indulgence leads into creating a mushy pile of things you enjoy that doesn't equate to anything, but selfish laundry list of shoutouts. To give a negative example, in Anton Blast, you can find a secret in the hub world where you go into a little room, and there's an imp NPC that's just in a recreation of the AVGN's room, and they just talk like the AVGN and say AVGN quotes. I think, genuinely, this is the worst joke I've ever seen in my life that isn't based upon bigotry. There's no wit, no dedication to a bit, this doesn't tie to a theme or a character's personality or anything. It's just a funny AVGN quote. It feels like the developers all went into a boardroom high on sugar and sleepover jitters and someone yelled this idea to thunderous applause, and now it's in the game and it's so— what's the joke? It's not funny. For an entirely visual example, Hi-Fi Rush is a very impressive game with a lot of style to it, but it's a really cobbled together style inspired by a bunch of random unrelated things the devs thought were cool. I understand they want a punchy and loud style to match with the game's rhythm gameplay, but while I think the game is perfectly fine at contextualizing the mechanics, and those mechanics are very well done, it also feels like a total poser game aesthetically. These characters are boring, flaccid stereotypes with maybe one entertaining moment each, and their designs perfectly convey how nothing they truly are. If they wanted to show off the loose, wild energy of loud music, then the characters could stand to actually evoke that, instead of the main character looking like Aladdin cosplaying an Overwatch character.
The only thing you have to defend yourself with in this game are—
Excuse me for dropping in.
There's chromatic aberrations because they saw Spider-Verse and thought that was cool, but Spider-Verse looks like this very specifically. It's turning the expressionist panel visuals of a comic into a fast-paced animated movie. That's why the frame rate's choppy, that's why you have all these colorful backgrounds. It's something comic books do, and they're translating that into a different medium because Spider-Man is a comic book character. This game's about music, this doesn't make me think of music. A significantly more interesting style would have been to have looser, abstract character designs, based on the visuals you'd see in music videos or album covers, with the robots you face being clean and generic as an intentional contrast. And I think that's what they're trying to do with the robots, but it doesn't really work. You're just a group of boring characters trudging through boring hallways. Apart from a handful of set pieces, every location looks the same, and it doesn't get me in a rock and roll mood at all. I'm sorry I took a brief intermission to talk about a completely different video game, but these critiques are important because it shows you how Myth True could have failed. Anton Blast and Hi-Fi Rush are not bad games at all, but they're they're ones that don't fully commit to a singular, unique vision, and instead wallow in a mess of inspirations that fit on a dating profile, not as a singular experience. Okay, one last thing. Why the fuck are the Hi-Fi Rush characters named after food? Like, I don't understand the thematic throughline. Why are they not named after some kind of music theme? Why is food? What does food have to do with the rest of the game? This is all really important to talk about because Mythchew's aesthetic is really integral to the appeal due to the personality behind it. Again, Leather is a very unique auteur, and I really appreciate his role as kind of the voice of the weird kids at the back of the class. The ones that took to DOS games, weird YouTube rabbit holes, and strange micro-communities, instead of the typical Zoomer nostalgia sludge of Nintendo, indie games, children's MMOs, and Valve. I'm a real PC gamer, dammit, you're just a Steam gamer! He's kind of like Andrew Hussey or the Brothers Chaps, in that their work builds up a long list of in-jokes and esoteric subject matter that you recognize they're into or just make them laugh, and seeing them repeatedly appear is satisfying as a fan. And in Leather's case, I don't get a lot of his references, but they're obscure and subtle enough that when one does hit something that I also think about a lot,
make him write bad checks.
it hits me hard because it feels like a shared memory. I understand if you're suspicious that I just like these references because he matches my freak and we're both weirdos, but far from it. I really like when he references completely inane shit that I've never heard of that caused me to go down a rabbit hole, and afterwards, seeing those references pop up again. This isn't even the first or second time he's incorporated GTA Myth videos into a game, but none of that means anything without this aesthetic serving as a complement to the gameplay. Mythchew's gameplay is so cleverly unique and inspired that it feels too good to be true. 100% true, even. Like I'm gonna find out that this game is actually a really derivative pastiche of some 90s Super Nintendo game where you use a camera as a weapon and my depression kicks in. It's one of the most genius combat systems of all time because it takes less than a minute to fully comprehend, but has so much depth that I could replay the game 4 times over and still think of new ways to improve. It really has that Rayman 3 itch I've been waiting to be scratched for a while. Why do I keep mentioning Rayman in all these goddamn videos? Basically, your attack is a camera shot that deals damage to all enemies within the square radius. It normally deals $1 of damage in this game being represented by how much money each photo makes, but the more enemies in a photo, the more damage it deals, and the more damage you deal, the more money you get, which is such a simplistic and genius way to innovate on platformer combat. There's also this really interesting dash move that can launch you off of slopes and give you brief invincibility and such, but unlike the normal photos, your dash cam shots can't combo, so it's really important to not rely on it. You can also perform this really fun bunny hop ability by jumping immediately once you hit the ground before your speed cuts down, allowing you to really cleanly soar across a level, but with how the levels in combat is structured, this isn't overpowered at all. It's another tool in your kit that takes a fuck ton of skill to use to its fullest potential, but it's easily some of the most fun I've had in a game like this. Finally, there's this photo bomb move that you can perform by dashing into an enemy and immediately taking a normal photo, changing the hitbox of the photo from in front of you to around you. It's a really intuitive and clever idea. It makes finding the right photos even more interesting. You're really carefully introduced to all of this in a nearly perfect tutorial. Everything you need to know about the game is almost instantly conveyed in a way that doesn't feel intrusive in the slightest. While it does directly tell you what input does what, it also makes sure to let you get comfortable with that control, with scenarios designed for you to feel clever for taking advantage of those moves. Like how right after learning you can dash off of slopes, you can immediately intuit to use it on this other slope and get a free collectible. Everyone knows by now the basic method of introducing the mechanic and then slowly progressing it in difficulty and complexity, blah 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 blah, but it's really important to non-verbally show the player what to do and allow them to make mistakes, because that's the best way to learn. Figuring something out by yourself is a lot easier to remember, and negative experiences are actually really important to our growth. I think a lot of game designers take the overprotective mother approach of trying to prevent accidents before they happen, and I think that approach is totally misguided. Like, thinking about your own life, I think it's really important to not avoid negative emotions in your life, and instead ruminate on how they make you feel and how you can learn from them. If you're constantly avoiding fear or anger or whatever, you're just gonna let that overwhelm you. It's the same with video games. If you get too frustrated over failure because you need to see constant progress, then I think you just need to stop and smell the roses and appreciate the journey. And on the designer's end, it's okay for people to be slightly lost. The popularity of this approach has caused a really unfortunate breed of people that are dependent on that kind of coddling. Like, I've seen people complain that you can just skip past all the enemies in a level, that there's no reason to engage with combat because progression isn't always gated by fighting the enemies, but I think that's a really close-minded and cynical view of video games. I understand if you just don't like the combat or what have you, but people always phrase this like they're being put in jail, like they want to take cool photos but need to be actively forced and have it demanded of them. I have to ask, why are you playing video games at all if you just carelessly binge eat your way through them like that? The game really cleanly tells you to take better photos to deal more damage and get more money, and the game feels well tuned enough for you to get that initial shot of dopamine on your first combo, and then you just ignore that because you aren't being literally forced to by gunpoint? If your impulsive reaction is to just try and ignore the game, then I think that's entirely your own fault as an undisciplined player that has a really warped perspective on how games should be designed. I'm normally entirely for the game restricting you and forcing you to play on its terms, but the ebb and flow of having to choose when to engage with the combat is important for its highest level of play. The highest honor of a level is getting the golden true, basically make enough money under a par time while not dying, requiring really intelligent planning around where the best spots for score are, how convenient each combat encounter is, and how much you want to speed past. Some of these levels have fucked routes that make me sweat in trying to pull them off. You have to be so precise while being fast that getting a clean run feels like heaven. 1-3 was giving me so much pain until I figured out the optimal pathing, and it felt incredible in Master. It always feels extremely doable, which is really important. There's never a point where I went, this was not designed for this at all. Sacrificing that beautiful balance and forcing all the combat encounters so the depressed 9-to-5 dads of the world are forced to actually have fun in their video game instead of treating it like a bag of chips is just a really depressing view of game design that I don't really understand at all. It's easy to wonder hypothetically about how to more directly tie money into the gameplay loop, but any idea you could pitch would just add further unnecessary bullshit to a really cleanly put together experience. Gating progression behind paywalls would be an easy way to encourage gated money, but that's a terrible idea because that instantly devalues everything else you can spend money on. Maybe you have to get at least 50% true or above on each of the levels, but all this really does is gate new players and add unnecessary stress to learning the game. I understand the idea of this argument, but basically every quote-unquote solution would make the game significantly less fun to play for everyone, or tack on unnecessary bloat, all because you're too exhausted or spoiled to enjoy the game. Again, if you just don't like the primary mechanic, it's fine, but all I ask is for you to engage with the game on its terms, instead of just mindlessly complaining that it isn't how exactly you want it. Because, again, there is so much to enjoy here. Give me money and you can join my Discord and vote on what game I'm gonna play. Also, we're watching The Purple Matrix on Sunday. Be there or be square. As I was saying, the photo taking is really good platformer combat because engaging with that combat requires you to perform platformer-like maneuverability. It's very classic Doom-like, in that each enemy is a singular, unique attack type, and the way those enemies combine together is what makes for interesting combat encounters. But instead of swapping between weapons and circle strafing to avoid damage, you're reading the environment for the perfect time to strike, then move back to safety for your camera to recharge. As an amateur photographer that took a class on the subject, this actually really appeals to me on a level that other photography games don't. Some screens have extremely reactionary moments, where you can instantly tell you could take a really good photo here, but based on how the enemies are laid out, you only have a moment to perform it. Meanwhile, there are other rooms that just place a bunch of enemies and trust you to be able to figure it out. The most interesting enemies being the projectile spawners. See, projectiles in this game don't give you money when photographed by themselves, but they do in a combo, so you can perform this really interesting semi-parry move by snapping a photo of an enemy right as the projectile spawns, but this is a really risky move. In some rooms, you actually want to wait instead, as enemies can spawn multiple projectiles that let you rack up a lot of points together. The Flatwoods Myths are one of my favorite enemies in the game. They spawn a homing enemy that can be photographed independently, but also, like the rest, can be comboed. This projectile is slow, homing, and multiple can be out at once, so it provides some of the most thought-provoking photographs in the entire game, where I purposefully let the screen fill up with them and carefully guide myself to the right place for a monstrous combo. Another favorite enemy is the Smile Cat, a basic enemy that dies in one hit, but makes the photo hazardous, exploding after a second. However, each Smile Cat is worth $3 as opposed to the usual one, so they're super valuable and worth the risk, but you have to plan around where you're going after you take the photo, which can get even more dangerous when there's multiple of them. My only criticism of the enemy design is that some enemies like trash bugs deal contact damage, while others don't, and there's no visual indicator of which do and which don't. Pizza Tower did this as well, but it always signified when enemies were hostile, or had a clear way of identifying the hostile part of their body. Like, yeah, you can't touch the Fork Knight's fork, that makes sense. But there isn't anything like that here. Thankfully, it's not hard to remember, it's never too big a deal, but it's something that I would fix in a patch. The photo system is also backed up by just how fun the movement is. In 4-2, there's this pin that can normally only be accessed by blocks that disappear after a combat encounter. I thought I fucked myself over from getting it, until I naturally intuited that if I jump, dash, and take a photo just right, I could just barely get the pin. It's not that I was a able to skip something, that doesn't inherently equal smart movement and can actually be a detriment in some games. Is that it took genuine ingenuity to think of something the game never even hinted I could try to bypass the obstacle. The level design is really carefully tuned to teach you things, and make you think about what the optimal method of play is. In 3-2 you get your first triple damage power up, giving you a temporary damage multiplier that, due to how the photos work, also counts as a score multiplier, so it's really valuable. The rooms right after have a ton of enemies like Foo Fighters that, while they can be photographed in a group for large points, if you wait a moment, they can shoot their projectile and double the money you'll get. This instantly creates a dichotomy where you can potentially score insane combos that would be impossible without the power-up. I got a $32 photo out of these, something unheard of without it, but you only have so much time, and speeding through and just taking whatever photos you can might give you more money in the long run. It really made me consider the optimal play, and that kind of thought process only works if the game design, level design, and enemy design are all finely tuned individually to become greater than the sum of their parts. It's kinda like Sonic. In classic and adventure Sonic games, the faster you complete the level, the larger of a time bonus you get that adds onto your score. However, you also have to think about the ring bonus, which gives you points based on the amount of rings you have at the end of the level. On top of this, there are plenty of ways to gain score in the level itself, so instead of a simple time attack, you have to think about how many points you're going to get in the level itself versus how much you need to skip in order to get that substantial time bonus. Ignoring time for points or points for time can be the make or break decision that gets you that final rank. Myth-True doesn't play like Sonic at all, but this specific dichotomy of route planning is really unique to older Sonic games, and it makes speedrunning them really fun. Too many modern games think speedrunning just boils down to going fast, but that's a complete misconception. Link can barely break a sprint in Ocarina of Time, but people go nuts breaking that game in half. It's not about going fast, it's going contextually faster than what you initially were. The kind of really clever optimizations that you have to do to get the goal true are easily the most fun things you can do in the game. In 4-3, the level starts with a slope that, if you dash into, you get launched into the higher path of the next screen, where a sensor, an enemy that prevents other enemies from being damaged until you damage them, is on the lower path, while Paper Birds, enemies with a notable startup animation to fly in a specific pattern, are on the higher path. Doing this on autopilot, you can easily just move down to the lower path, take out the sensor and then the birds, but if you skip the initial ramp and move down, you can really cleanly take out the sensor before the birds start moving, then dash up and snap the birds in one photo, earning a big point bonus for scoring so many and giving you plenty of opportunity to just dash to the next screen. But the trick is, if you're just going for time, you should go on the first ramp, because the enemies aren't guarded on the way through, but the score focus method also was a really clean and efficient way to go about it. It's another subtle battle between time and score. I really want to highlight level design because I think people don't talk about it enough, when it is absolutely the glue that holds games like this together. Blood is maybe one of the stupidest designed enemies in FPS history, but the levels are so clever with how they use them that the game remains one of the greatest action games to exist. I'm speaking as someone who likes fighting cultists, by the way, so don't think I'm a poser. I was most surprised in the level design's method of approach to narrative. Again in 4-3, you can see a future boss come in and just shoot a myth you faced before. Even if the myth gets back up, it immediately sets this character up as a threat, and Tortino later appears in the level for you to talk about this mysterious character, her giving you some context on what exactly their deal is. It's so simple yet elegant. The NPCs add so much flair and world to the game, and you can skip right past most of the dialogue if you really don't care, but I think you're really missing out on something, because despite being this kind of game, Myth-True is a pretty interesting, compelling story that isn't the most complex or beautiful, but I think goes far beyond what most quote-unquote good game stories do. A lot of modern platformers have extremely mashable dialogue, so I don't blame you for thinking this is going to be one of those cases, but I ended up really enjoying this cast and story. A lot of that comes from the boss fights, which are, first of all, mechanical standouts. I've lamented before about how action games seem to circle constantly with boss battles, but Myth-True completely nails it, partially because the game is already about combat, but they also really effortlessly incorporate group photo mechanics into a boss fight, with bosses spawning projectiles and other enemies that you can combo off of. The levels are still the most fun part of the game, but that's fine because the bosses are still very enjoyable, and I was looking forward to each new one. But something you might notice about them is that all of these guys feel somewhat familiar. Engine number 9, a blue robot that takes from other life forces. Yeah, in a really unique method of theming, each of the bosses are based on failed video games. I'll only spoil a couple of them because I really want you to play this game for yourself. The second boss, Palanta, is an eccentric entertainer high off their own supply, believing nobody can truly understand their art, that few have the patience for it. But this art is so actively hostile that it nearly breaks Clev's camera. After the show, and after Clev mentions this, Palanta apologizes and reconciles that, while he should keep being his weirdo self, he shouldn't be afraid of meeting the audience halfway. More importantly, just listen to other people, as you can still make things for yourself while not sacrificing who you are. You can probably already figure this out, but he's based on Balan Wonderworld. The third boss, unlike the others, is an attention seeker. They create a loop in space-time just so you can't escape the location they're in. Once you meet this boss, Keigano, she instantly acts overjoyed to see Hlev, but immediately gets upset because, according to her, Hlev is wearing something ridiculous, even though this is what Hlev always wears. But she insists that Hlev isn't the real one. She then snaps, yelling about how everyone thinks they're better than her before entering her fight. So we have an obsessive young girl in a school with an unhealthy ego, an inability to listen to other people, and an overall lack of self-awareness. Yup, that's Yandere Simulator. These characters aren't just pastiches of games the author likes, they're all different interpretations of how MythTrue itself could have gone wrong, the kind of philosophies that Leather Ice Cream should avoid, and how they learned from those failures. Again, these are really meaningful references that are used to present an idea, and the original characters made out of them are entertained by themselves. Okay, one more thing and then I'm going to give the actual spoiler warning. This system on Backlog wrote a really interesting review that interpreted the fourth boss as being a sort of metaphor for plurality, and while I doubt the intention, it made me like the characters even more as a really positive representation of a group of people that kinda don't get that luxury. Basically, any look at plurality in media is in the form of an easy punching down about LOL schizo posts, so I don't know, I thought I should mention that as a plus in the game's story. Then again, in Leather's previous game, Jetta did say he should have more friends in his head that one time, so maybe this is just a running theme of Leather's work. Either way, the fact that you even can interpret something like that is a showcase of how much a narrative there is. Again, even if it's simple. Okay, I want to talk about spoilers now because I think this game is really fucking sweet and I want to gush about that. Buy this goddamn game and leave a positive review, even if it's just a shit post, because that can help a lot with the Steam algorithm and shit. Okay, everyone that hasn't beat the game, get out. Go play it. So you go through the final few levels of the game and they're really hyping up a mysterious entity called Cordon Blues, a super myth that causes disaster anywhere they go, with Tortino and the super myths being terrified of them. And in the finale, they're stationed at the top of your hub building. It's here, and with a little help from the logbook, that we understand the full picture. These guys are afraid as hell of failure. Every flaw they have is a projection of the fear of being seen as a failure again, partially caused by Pekarovich, this weird alternate universe Hlev, obsessed with making money in a universe that doesn't really care about that anymore. But Hlev, in studying them and overcoming them, helped them embrace these failures, and he now has the confidence to go face larger threats. Metaphorically, it was learning the tales of bad games that allowed history to not repeat itself. And now, you climb up to face the ultimate threat, the final challenge, a rabbit. What? What bad video game is this? Jazz Jackrabbit 2, one of my favorite games of all time, a game Leather also really enjoys. But the game was still a failure. It was released in a really competitive era when 2D platformers weren't selling the best on consoles, and on PC they were a long-forgotten genre. Through no fault of the game itself, it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cordon Blues is the most powerful myth because they're an actually really good game, one beloved by those who play it, myself included, but that wasn't enough. They're an icon of bad luck, of misfortune. Throughout the whole game, Hlev has been making jokes about finally finding Mothman, a paranormal entity that brings bad luck everywhere it goes. Cordon Blues is the actual Mothman, in that people believe that anywhere they go, disaster will follow. So you fight Cordon Blues, you overcome it, but you enter a final phase against a giant group of blues called the Judges. You're literally being judged. I interpreted this in the moment as a council of critics, of judgmental eyes picking you apart. Maybe you were once up there, but by laying your heart out, you feel oh so below them. But as you lay the final photo, as Cordon Blues lays dead, you remember that, wait a minute, Cordon Blues is dead? This entire time we've been taking photos of myths, we're not hurting them, they just get scared off. Hlev doesn't even die when he loses health, he just loses a camera. Cordon Blues was just playing dead, and this is just a rabbit. A really powerful rabbit, but a rabbit. There was no secret evil. There are no villains beyond people acting kinda like jerks. Pekarovich was trying to use the fear of Cordon Blues for profit, the embodied fear that you can do everything right and still fail. But he fails because it isn't that. It's just a rabbit. Your fears are just fears. Misfortune isn't caused by anything. There is no scroll of success, or entity of bad luck to avoid. There's just you. Of course, with the title of the video, you might be expecting a certain game to show up. One that I've neglected to mention. What many people consider the true indie game of the year. Hollow Knight Silksong. So, what's my argument? How can I possibly prove that this game has nearly as much going for it as Silksong does? Even trying is a nearly impossible feat, so I decided I'm not gonna do it.